What happened in those last few months and weeks that really turned this thing around for you and took it home?
Yeah, so I mean, you're right. When we met, I did feel good about where we were, and it wasn't always reflected in the polls. In fact, it was never reflected in the polls in the primary, but we could never dismiss what we were experiencing on the ground. We were running into people who said that they had never voted before and were voting. We ran into folks who said, everybody says you don't have a chance, but I have to tell you, man, you're talking my language, or whatever that was. Jackie, we had 150,000 voters show up in the primary who either voted once for the first time or two had not voted in the previous 3 elections. 150,000.
Why do you think that is?
Well, I mean, I think people want to be asked for their vote, number one. And there are far too many communities that we pass over. They're not traditional voters. They don't vote in midterm elections. They only vote in presidentials. We put these labels on them. And the truth is that I wouldn't vote either if you don't spend any time and energy talking to me about the things that matter.
Let's start with healthcare, because that's been a big staple in your campaign.
Sure.
You talk about Medicaid expansion. Yeah. Some people call that universal healthcare, single payer healthcare. How would you describe it?
Yeah, well, first of all, I would say that I think we made a terrible mistake when we had the opportunity to expand Medicaid when the Affordable Care Act was originally passed. And we said, no, thank you. Today, we now have 1 in 5 Floridians who don't have access to health care. They're getting it through emergency rooms, which is most expensive and least efficient. And it also happens to be they go there when they're at their most acute stage of illness. So it's going to be double the expense. So my thinking is that if you have the opportunity to get someone connected to health care, save costs, and not just for those who don't have access to care, but also for those who have insurance, small businesses who are trying to seek insurance. The reasons why our premiums are increasing year over year over year is because the system has to pay for those who are getting access to the emergency room. So my proposal is we ought to expand access to health care for the 800,000 folks in this state who will qualify for Medicaid expansion. By expanding Medicaid, we could pull down $6 billion from the federal government that right now is being given to other states because Florida theoretically or philosophically disagrees with the Affordable Care Act. We had Republican governors.
But it has been noted that it's not working. They continue to increase the premiums for those people who signed up earlier.
Well, Florida, we can't tell the story whether it works or not. We never actually accepted it. We never actually leaned into the benefits that would have come with expanding the Affordable Care Act and expanding access to health care. But you got hospitals, you even got insurance companies now who are saying, we have got to move in this direction. It's been amazing on this trail, some of the odd coupling that I've run into, because for some of these interests who have largely been, frankly, Republican backers, they're saying this is the right thing to do, and it is high time that we elect a governor who's prepared to move the state in that direction.
So you say you would get money from the federal government?
Absolutely.
Is that enough to pay for it?
Well, right now the federal system would cover 100% of it. And then in staged process, the state would take on more. But right now, the state takes on all of it. And then the cost is shared between what the state does, which, by the way, healthcare is the fastest and most expensive part of the state budget. And then what we in the private sort of insurance space and small businesses have to make up for through our premium increases. And so, as I said, if you got to pay one way or another, why not pay smarter?
Some people are concerned that this could be socialized medicine, and this is opening up the door to something like that.
Well, I don't think so, and I also think that we have to make a strong delineation between what is a social program versus socialism, right? Nicaragua and the Ortega regime is socialism. What we've seen in Venezuela under Maduro is socialism. What we saw under the Castro brothers, where the government literally takes people's private property, takes their businesses and brings it under the ownership of the government, executes political enemies and exiles those who disagree with them. That is socialism, and no one is advocating for that. What we're saying is that there ought to be a social safety net, a place by which people can't fall beneath. And the wealthiest country in all the world, and in the state of Florida, which has now topped a $1 trillion economy, it should not be too much to ask that we can create a system where people can get affordable and accessible health care. I think we got to get to a place where we treat healthcare more as a right than a privilege.
You talked about $1 trillion economy. The other big issue for Floridian voters, of course, the economy and jobs. Right now, and you've discussed this, 3.7% unemployment rate in the state of Florida. Many people credit Governor Scott for the upturn in the economy in the state of Florida. And you beg to differ. So where does that stand? So you do not think that Florida is in a good state right now in terms of its economy?
So I think there are a lot of measures to the success of an economy. Just as the president talks a lot about the performance of the stock market. Well, the stock market doesn't tell you a complete story. You could be going gangbusters, but the gangbuster benefit only exists for about 1% of the population. And the same is true for an economy. You can have low unemployment, but if people are working multiple jobs, or if folks are working low-wage work and then are working in an underground economy, that's not so good. And the facts are, and this is from the Alice report produced statewide by the United Way, 44% of people in the state of Florida say that they cannot make ends meet. 44% of the people who are working, and many of them feel like they're working harder than ever and still aren't able to pull down a wage that they can live on. So while the economy may be doing good for some, we're talking about almost half the state that can't pay their bills. And if you got one income bracket removed, you have folks that if they went without a paycheck for 1 or 2 paycheck cycles, they would find themselves in the poorhouse too. That kind of absence of economic independence is a huge problem for us. And so my proposal is we've got to start to build the kind of economy in this state where people, one, can work one job and be able to earn enough to take care of themselves and their family. And that means that we've got to turn our attention to how we diversify Florida's economy. A low-wage economy is not going to be the future of the state of Florida. It's certainly not in my vision. That means
increase minimum wage?
Well, increase minimum wage, but also, and again, I'm in favor of increasing minimum wage. I think people who work a full-time job, who get up every single day and spend a minimum of 40 hours a week on a job, they shouldn't be earning poverty wages. That's a value statement. That's not to say that people who achieve more don't earn more. That you don't inherit money and you do well. I'm not saying we're all going to make the same amount. But I am simply saying that if you work a full-time job, you ought not be being paid poverty wages. And so our proposal is, because in spite of a minimum wage increase, I don't know a single person who wants to earn a minimum. Everybody I know wants to earn enough where they can pay their bills and maybe save up enough to take a vacation every once in a while. And so how do you make that kind of economy accessible? One, I think we lean into what our opportunity moments are. So when I talk about our future economy, what does it mean for Florida to be the solar capital of the United States? What does it mean for us to lead in innovation when it comes to the fact that global warming and climate change is real? There's already budding technology around carbon extraction from the atmosphere to help remove some of the carbon. These are new wage technologies that Florida ought to be the incubator for. We ought to be teaching the rest of the world how you grow an economy, a green economy, in the face of environmental challenges, at the same time save our environment. What does it mean to, as we know in this country, we don't have a jobs gap, we have a skills gap. One of the biggest complaints that major corporations have about the state of Florida is that they come here, they can't find the talent that they need to do the jobs that they create.
You mentioned the big corporations. You've also talked about taxing some of those big corporations. Will that drive some of those big companies out of the state of Florida, or even worse, not bring some of those big corporations into the state?
Well, that hasn't been the story of Illinois. It hadn't been the story of New York or of California or of Louisiana, for that matter, which has a higher corporate tax rate than the state of Florida. And in the state of California, whether you're headquartered there or whether you're a bodega, everybody pays the corporate tax rate. In the state of Florida, and I'm not proposing to change this part of it, but in Florida, 97% of businesses don't pay the corporate tax rate.
So what are you proposing?
What we're proposing, one other clarification I want to make, because my opponent has talked a lot about this. Andrew wants to impose an income tax. I have no interest in imposing an income tax. Not to mention the governor of the state of Florida couldn't impose an income tax if he or she wanted to, because it's prohibited by the state constitution. So what we've said is for the top 3% of corporations, these are the wealthiest companies that exist in our state, who thanks to the Trump tax realignment walked away with $6.3 billion a year, ongoing and increasing year over year. $6.3 billion. That's our money, regular working people's money, that has just blown a big hole in the federal deficit, right? So what we said is that you can keep $5.3 billion. We just want $1 billion of that to come into the state, pay teachers a salary they can live on, introduce high-quality early learning childhood education, and bring back into our public high school system apprenticeships, woodwork, shop, mechanical, electrical, technical, all those skills that we can monetize those skills, introduce a more qualified and well-trained workforce to then do the jobs that these folks are creating. It's a win-win.
How much are you talking about? You talk about $1 billion. Yeah. How does that translate
it's
into?
2.5. It's a 2.5 point increase in the corporate tax rate.
But would that be a job killer? Because as
Not
you
at
know,
all.
Governor Scott ran his campaign, his previous campaign, jobs, jobs, and jobs.
Yes.
And he has
Created low-wage jobs.
Well, he's created jobs, and the unemployment rate is 3.7%. Some people say that if you increase taxes, that will be a job killer. How do you respond to that?
That has not been borne out, not in other states. And quite frankly, let's test the theory of what being a cheap date has done for the state of Florida. Rick Scott has been credited with creating jobs, but every fact checker has also pointed to the fact that these are low-wage jobs. Look, I'm not disparaging anybody's job. If people get an opportunity to work, we want that. But my vision for the work that we want to provide them are jobs that are jobs with dignity, that pay them a wage they can live on, that offers them a retirement, benefits, paid vacation. Those are the kinds of jobs that we can create in this state. And guess what? You don't have to be a college graduate to walk into those positions.
I do want to discuss with you what is going on with the FBI investigation,
Yes.
because this has been lingering for a while, and
Sure.
there are some reports.
3 years.
Yes, and there are some reports that seem to indicate that it could continue throughout the next few months, even after the election. So here's your opportunity to clear things up.
Sure.
Where does that stand, and what's going on with the probe?
Yeah, and I've talked a lot about it, obviously, over the last 20 months. So first thing is important for me to note is that I am not under FBI investigation, and neither is the city of Tallahassee. I have a zero tolerance for corruption, and what we've said all along is that if anyone has done anything wrong, they ought to be held fully accountable for their actions and adjudicated through the normal criminal justice system. What my opponents have obviously done, and we've seen this in their commercials, which, by the way, PolitiFact have ranked false completely. Every ad that my opponent is running on this to attempt to suggest guilt by association, is that, do I know individuals? Absolutely. I'm the mayor of a city that is, got 200,000 people in it, and in every single business and enterprise that happens, I ought to know about it. But I think what I would want the voters of the state of Florida to know, and I think that people judge me by this in the primary as well, is what my integrity is the fact that I've served for 15 months without so much as a scourge to my name until I decided to run for governor of the state of Florida. For 15 years, I've served delivering for my community with my values and my integrity never questioned, and again, completely held intact. I'm now in a race for governor, and all of a sudden, my character is under assault. Every relationship and every person I know, I'm supposed to now carry the burdens and the responsibilities of who their friends are and their friends' friends are. And all I've simply asked voters is to measure me by me. My grandmother always told me, if you tell the truth, you don't ever have to worry about covering up for lies. And so all along the way, I've told the truth. And as new information comes in, we welcome that. It's my hope that the FBI does its job, and it does a thorough job, and I hope that they bring it to conclusion soon. But as it relates to my role in that, I have no role other than aiding them in whatever way that we can to help them reach whatever conclusion they need to reach.
I want to talk specifically about what we've seen in the front page newspapers this past weeks, and specifically in the Miami Herald as well. A trip to New York,
Yes.
which many people have been talking about, a hotel room, Hamilton ticket, who paid for the hotel room, who paid for the Hamilton ticket.
Yeah, so again, I was in New York for work, and I think the latest release of material from Mr. Corey and his attorney actually lay out, in the text message it says, will you be able to join us? I know you said you have meetings. And I said, I do have meetings, and I've got meetings tomorrow, but I'll be able to join you tonight. Prior to going to New York, and I knew that they would be obviously in the city, we had to discuss going to see a play and maybe catching a baseball game. My brother, who's also close to Adam, was also on the trip. I reached out to my brother, told him to take care of my ticket, and that I catch up with him later. Now, my brother, who is very close to me, who's lived with me, goes to concerts and has provided me tickets to different concerts and football games and so on and so forth, mainly because I don't have the time to do it myself. It would have been nothing out of the ordinary of how he and I interact with each other. And I think that's important for people to know. When Adam told me that there was a way that we were going to be able to get tickets for Hamilton, I said, yes, good. We'll see you when I get out of my meetings. I showed up. My brother gave me my ticket. We went in.
Where did you think the ticket came from?
Well, my brother is where I think it came
So
from.
that he had paid for
Absolutely,
the ticket?
absolutely. And I was told as much, by the way.
But don't the text messages refute that?
Not at all.
When they
The
tell
text
you
messages simply say that Mike Miller was able to get tickets to Hamilton. My brother, and by the way, just so you know, and I think
Mike
regular
Miller,
people,
who was an undercover
right, but at that
agent.
time, he
You
was
thought
Mike
it was-
Miller.
right,
I mean,
right,
as
a
far as I'm
developer.
concerned. And by the way, it wouldn't have made any difference to me. But the point being is, so for anyone who has friends, and maybe it's a guy thing, but I think it's most people understand this. If you go on a trip or you go to a concert, typically if you're going to sit together, somebody procures and then everybody pays their fair share. I know that I've had the responsibility of doing that for people before. But I honestly think to kick this up a level, while it feels really nice and maybe sensational to sort of go into those kinds of things, what I have said repeatedly is exactly what I believe over the course of this ethics case will bear out. While those text messages may seem new to everybody else, I've given my testimony to the Ethics Commission. I've known about all of these all along, and my story hasn't changed one time. Why? Because when you tell the truth, you don't need to change your story. You just let folks know what it is that you know and what you did. Now, I have to tell you, if I had it to do again, because I think it's important you reflect on things and you take ownership for what your contributions are. If I had to do it again, I would ask more questions. I would have been a lot more judicious about that, but in the context of the fact that I've known Adam since our freshman year in college for 20 years, you know, somebody who attended my wedding, we've gone on vacations together, we traveled together, we were friends, legitimately. I never suggested that there was something untoward or that, you know, somebody would attempt to, you know, put me in a situation where my integrity would be questioned. I never expected that. It's only in hindsight that, you know, you start to rethink it. And so if I had to do it again, I absolutely would ask different questions. But don't mistake that in any way to mean that I would have done or have conducted myself in any way that is illegal, unethical, or untoward. I don't believe in that. I've never conducted myself that way. I often talked about when I was a kid and the cops would show up at the house because my brothers would have gotten into some trouble. And when my mother would close the door, I'd see, you know, tears sort of well up in her eyes. And I remember making a decision as a kid. I never, ever, ever wanted to make my mother cry in that way. That's why I went on, became the first in my family to graduate from high school and the first to graduate from college. I've got too many things to live for and to frankly be an example for, to include my 3 children, to make stupid mistakes.
Okay, fair enough. Another big issue in this race has been race, quite frankly. Just recently, a robocall that was sent out, and that in many cases it was a racist robocall.
Yeah. The second.
Who do you think was responsible for that?
Well, I mean, I think the group has been traced back to neo-Nazis, and I appreciate my opponent sort of decrying that. But my opponent also has to, and with the president as well earlier this week, you know, he came out on the trail and, you know, said this is a time we have to come together, and then went back to slamming the media, went back to slamming the same Democrats who received bombs in their mailboxes. Leaders have to take responsibility for our contributions to the climate that we create. In this climate, we've got, my opponent started this race by telling Floridians not to monkey up the race by electing me. He's given countless speeches to extreme right-wing groups, including side by side with a speaker who is a Holocaust denier. He has sent text messages into people's cell phones saying that I'm anti-cop, lawless, wants to open borders. You know, these kinds of, which by the way are all untrue. But that kind of rhetoric, you have to believe that at some level it's going to pierce people. You have to believe at some level this is going to provide some ammunition, some motivation for people to take actions that are very dangerous. I have felt, in my own life how we've had to change my environment as I compete in this race for governor to make sure that everybody remains safe. My simple ask would be that we as leaders have to kick this thing up a notch. We have to raise the level of discourse up to a point where we aren't giving reason and rise to our supporters to act out in ways that are dangerous and that are violent, and that we don't give cover to that in any way, shape, or form. And so I've tried to be responsible with the way in which I deal with my opponent. I have addressed him on his issues. I've held him accountable on his votes. I've held him accountable on his speeches as well. But what you don't have me going out there and doing is saying things that would, in my opinion, elicit violent and visceral responses to him, because I don't wish him or his family any harm. He is a man with a wife and with a family and two beautiful kids. I'm a husband to my wife RJ and a father to my kids Jackson, Caroline, and Davis. And they deserve to be safe, and we deserve to be safe. And quite frankly, the voters of this state deserve a higher level of debate that, again, does not create the condition and the environment for violence to be perpetuated.